All right. Good morning, everyone. Happy October. All right, so we're going to get started today with our Committee of the Whole. We have a full agenda. I'll walk through our Committee of the Whole. I have a couple items at the start of our commission that are not voting items before we get to our scheduled agenda. And then, Commissioners, just to walk you through the day so that you know what to expect. After COW, depending on how much time we have, I will call for an executive session to have a conversation about a legal opinion. Yes? Yes. Okay. And, I thought we talked about this last week. Yes. So I'm going to call for an executive session. And then we have two special briefings today. And then we have those of you who serve with me on Economic Development Project Team. We have Economic Development Project Team at 12:30. Then we're back in here at 1:30 for a work session. And then we are back in here at 6 p.m. for the swearing-in ceremony of our city manager who joins us today for his very first city commission meeting. And then we'll have our city commission meeting tonight at 7 o'clock. So it's a full day. I believe that we have lunch coming at noon. It'll be a 9:01. And then hopefully between our work session and 6 p.m. swearing-in, you'll have time to take a break and get something to eat for dinner. So that's what the day entails. So to start us off this morning, I have a couple proclamations that I want to read, two of them, but I also want to highlight an award that we recently received. So I'm going to go to the podium over there to do these three items. So I am going to start by asking Dave Heron and members of the Water Department to join me as I read this proclamation on imagining a day without water, which is really a terrifying thought. Hi. How are you? Good to see you. I bring everybody. That's okay. That's all right. Before I read the proclamation, I'll just say on behalf of the entire City Commission and City leadership how much we appreciate all of your work and all of your service here at the City. All right, and here's a proclamation. Whereas the infrastructure that brings water to and from homes and businesses is essential to the quality of life and economic vitality of our city. And whereas the Grand Rapids water system serves roughly 280,000 customers and maintains more than 1,260 miles of water distribution within 137 square miles. And whereas the water system's Lake Michigan filtration plant pumps more than 13 billion with a B, billion gallons of water to its customers annually. And whereas managing water responsibly is critical to our city's public and environmental health and to a high quality of life through economic commerce, power generation, and recreation. Whereas investing in our drinking water and wastewater systems will secure a bright and prosperous future for generations to come. Whereas the Grand Rapids water system is dedicated to investing in safe and reliable water and wastewater infrastructure. And whereas the water system recognizes that water is essential to the quality of life and economic competitiveness, and it acknowledges the importance of educating the public about the value of water through the Imagine a Day Without Water campaign. Whereas Imagine a Day Without Water is an appropriate and timely opportunity to formally thank all of our City of Grand Rapids employees for their extraordinary service to our community. Now therefore I, Rosalind Bliss, Mayor of our amazing city, do hereby proclaim October 10th as Imagine a Day Without Water in Grand Rapids, and I encourage all of our citizens to recognize the importance of reliable access to clean water in our lives and in the investment of infrastructure that is necessary to protect this valuable resource.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to say a few words before we depart. We often take our water and wastewater systems for granted. We turn on the tap and water comes out. We flush the toilet and it goes away. Most of us hardly think twice about the infrastructure that brings water to our homes and safely returns water to our environment. Imagine a Day Without Water is a tribute to the employees you see standing before you, who work around the clock ensuring water and wastewater service is always available. Again, please take a moment to thank these employees and the many more who come, or the many more who could not be with us today, for their services to our community and the incredible work they perform to our utility systems. Thank you.
This is reading. All right, and next, to honor another remarkable city employee, I would like to call up to join me Miss Becky Jo Glover. Recently, the National Association of Government Web Professionals awarded the City of Grand Rapids the Pinnacle Award in the Large Cities category for our website redesign. So this award comes after 7 months, a lot of hard work, and I see some of our team in the audience today. A lot of support from the community who played a part in creating our website through user testing. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Becky Jo. She has the award right here, but
Thank you, Mayor.
oh, you're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mayor, City Commissioners, Mr. Manager, our audience, of course, our community, and our great team that worked on all the departments and our subject matter experts. If there's an award that you would want to get for our website redesign, it would be this award because it's voted on by our peers throughout the country. Some of the past winners have been San Antonio, St. Louis, Plano, and so forth, and that we're playing at the mighty level of Grand Rapids. And we just want to thank everyone in the city, our community. We had the first ever community civic user testing group that the city sponsored. And you have not found this around the country at all, where every service and every page was tested by our community. So we thank our community because they built it with, for, and by us, with us. And then we had a subject matter expert team. I'm not going to make you all stand up, but without our departments and our subject matter expert team, we would never make this happen. So again, thank you all for your support. We look forward to working with the city manager and the commission on continuing to grow our digital footprint, as well as a digital inclusive survey and strategic plan as discussed, and we look forward to moving that forward. So thank you again for all your support, because you really trusted us, and not bad after 7 months. Thank you so much.
Becky Jo, I feel like you should have this award in your office.
Well, we'll take that. Thank you. Thank you.
I'll come back up here for the last one. All right, and last, before we get to our formal agenda today, I want to take a moment to acknowledge and honor a true giant in our community that we recently lost. And so recently I did a proclamation that will be shared publicly, and I'd like to read that this morning and take just a few moments to remember a pretty amazing man who has left a huge impact on our community. So this is a proclamation to honor Benjamin Logan. Whereas Honorable Benjamin Logan was a graduate of Ohio Northern University Law School and served as 61st District Court Judge in Grand Rapids for nearly 30 years, from his first election in 1988 until his retirement from the bench in 2014. And whereas Judge Logan was one of the founding members of the Floyd Skinner Bar Association of Black Lawyers in Grand Rapids. And whereas he was a passionate and active member of our community within the National Bar Association, chairing their Judicial Council from 1994 to 1995, and prior to his retirement was inducted into the National Bar Association's Hall of Fame in August of 2013. Whereas Judge Logan was viewed as a mentor and a community leader, forging legal relationships locally and across the country, while speaking out on issues that were important to both the African American community and the Grand Rapids community as a whole. Whereas Judge Logan has had an incredible impact on our community that leaves a lasting legacy on our city, along with every single life that he touched. Our community is a better place because of his passion, dedication, and tireless work over the years. Now therefore I, Rosalind Bliss, Mayor of the City of Grand Rapids, do hereby recognize Judge Benjamin Logan for his lifetime of dedication to public service, his commitment to supporting fellow lawyers and judges, and for his years of service to the citizens of Grand Rapids. Thank you. All right, and now we will turn to our agenda. So first on our agenda, Commissioners, we have a report of outcomes that came from the engagement process that we embarked on for the Housing Now zoning ordinance amendments. So we'll start this off. Looks like Eric DeLong will start us off, and then we'll go through a presentation.
Thank you. My role here today is simple. It's to introduce our presenters. And when we had the public hearing and heard from the public about the 4 zoning ordinance amendments, the commission decided and concluded that we needed to have more public engagement, and we wanted to do it in a different way. And so we recruited a public agency at WMCAT, and they designed a really unique process. That's the first of the kind that we've done like this for a major, well, first of the kind we've done like this. And to use it in this way was really important. So today we'll have Adam Weiler and Kirk Eklund from Public Agency at WMCAT. They will describe the process that we went through, but also, and more importantly, the results of the engagement, which I think are really compelling. So with that, I'd like to have Adam and Kirk start.
Good morning.
Good morning.
What we wanted to do is acknowledge all the work that's been directed at this effort first. So even starting back in March with this commissioners meeting, in April there was a presentation to the Committee of the Whole, and at that point in time, shortly thereafter, the contract work began. Over the summer, we started doing stakeholder engagements, which capstoned in August with these community listening engagements, and then in September we sort of analyzed that report, which you have in front of you now. We wanted to also acknowledge the team. It's more than Kirk and I. It's Lataro and Sergio who aren't able to be with us this morning, and also a ton of support from the Bloomberg Mayor's Challenge team. They were invaluable in this work, as was the planning department, helping us understand all of the nuances that go into code. So wanted to kick it off with the project scope. For us, it was threefold. Our goal was to analyze prior engagements, to design, prototype, and test a potential new engagement structure, and to facilitate the community engagement sessions around the Housing Now Amendments 3, 6, 8, and 9 as put forth by the Planning Commission. And so with that, these are sort of like sub-goals of that. So in analyzing prior engagements, we were to meet with neighborhood associations, nonprofit developers, and other stakeholders to understand the pain points of past engagements, their experiences with the Housing Now amendments, and to surface nuances that were in extra need of clarity. This looked like meeting with neighborhood associations, nonprofit developers, community advocacy groups, Community Catalyst, which is a network of equity-minded professionals using innovation to affect change, and the City Planning Department. Some of these, we tried to make these as engaging as possible, and this is a fishbone diagram, which is a traditional tool used in Lean, but sort of using that to dig into what made for good and bad engagements to sort of surface principles. Also understanding the perspectives of nonprofit developers, and then working with equity-minded neighbors to surface blind spots. So you can see the questions on the board there are, what creative tweaks might we make accessible, or might we make to these formats to make these ideas more accessible? Who are the people in your network that will be most affected by these amendments, and what are potential blind spots in moving forward? Also doing a lot of learning from prior engagements, and just learning what makes for a healthy and robust community engagement. So the principles that were identified and prioritized out of those engagements were as follows. We needed to avoid insider language. The language needed to be accessible, descriptions needed to be clearly written, and no acronyms were to be left unexplained. There needed to be an emphasis on listening and allowing time for processing. As part of that, we needed to hold space for question and dialogue. The content needed to be visual, descriptive, and accurate. Events should be accessible and low friction, and some things to consider were a variety of timing options, meals and childcare, and materials that would be translated into Spanish. Additionally, marketing materials needed to be easy to spread throughout networks, and facilitation should be impartial. So based off of those learnings, we developed a prototype test engagement structure. With stakeholders, we invited all of those folks to come back to test the structure, the usefulness of the group processing mechanisms, and content clarity. All stakeholders were invited to come back and sort of have their opinions voiced in the highs and lows, and we used a mechanism of sort of like what was above the board and below the board. So here you can see Sergio leading this, and this is identifying where are those areas for improvement in the actual event. And finally, the meat of it was to facilitate the community engagement sessions. So we refined, based off of that feedback, we refined and facilitated 4 community engagement sessions to meet with the stated goals of gathering community feedback on the zoning amendments of 3, 6, 8, and 9. And what you have in front of you is the sort of large ballot that was used to both sort of walk through this content. Leading up to the event, we had bilingual flyers. We had canvassed around impacted neighborhood spaces. We had also had a presence at 5 National Night Out events. There was an educational video that we had worked to produce that was shared around networks and had over 17,000 views and 250 shares. There were other outlets as like robocalls with GRPS. There was a partnership with them, so that call went out to a lot of families. And the 311 hold line also had information about the event. That said, the event structure was rooted in principles, so there was 1 session in every ward. There were 3 evening sessions, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, 1 Saturday session that was during the daytime. Childcare was provided at the first session at Other Way, and meals were provided at every session, along with, there were bilingual facilitators, slides, and workbooks were available. And all this was made possible through the funding through the Bloomberg Mayor's Challenge. Again, all voices, additional structure written principles, all voices were to have an equal say. Small groups were to be facilitated by a table host to allow that sort of intimacy to process the information. Large groups were then led through instructions, at which time table hosts then surfaced the large group questions, and the planning team was on site to help answer those questions as subject matter experts. Additional forms were submitted via table host and through online surveys. So the session structure, and this is sort of what the evenings and the Saturday session looked like, was 15 minutes of a zoning 101, and then 25 minutes each to dig into each of the specific amendments. And what we'll do now is sort of set the context. Again, each session was framed with this big question. It's whether or not the community supports moving these amendments from special land use to administrative approval. So all of these things are currently being built in our community. They're legal, but the question is whether or not the community felt that it was okay to move them from this sort of bottom process to the top process that was with administrative approval. These meetings are to find out These meetings are to find out if the community supports moving these 4 amendments from special land use to administrative approval, and administrative approval means by right. Okay, so for every amendment, there were 5 minutes of examples. Again, rooted in principles, our goal was to make these visual. So if we're going to talk about reducing the minimum of 20,000 square foot needed, that's a pretty abstract number just to have. And so in what way can we use everyday objects in our community to make that real? So if you were to have a 60-foot wide plot, you would need approximately a 333-foot deep plot in order to accommodate the 20,000 square foot. Additionally, what does it look like as far as the implications of this 500 feet? How do we use visuals to sort of make it really evident that this is a transitional space from mixed-use commercial into low-density residential? And not just in graphics of abstract spaces, but in real spaces. So this was the corner of Burton and Division. So after a presentation that was really visual, every amendment had 7 minutes of table talk, and the goal was for residents at the table to surface, hey, what are the questions that we have? In what way do we need more clarity? Those were led by table hosts who are self-proclaimed not zoning experts, but their goal was to help the question identify what the big questions were that they needed clarity for. And so the way that was broken down, again, on your sheet in front of you, the top portion is sort of a visual description of what it looks like. This was presented as like, if you want your car to go 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, or do you want it to get 60 miles a gallon? The stuff below is the zoning tweaks that would need to make that happen. So it's like, that's if you want to get into the nitty-gritty under the hood in order to make that happen. At that point in time, there was a large group question and answer that was facilitated by the city from the planning team that did an awesome job. And additionally, there was online access through August 28th. And so all of this information is made available to you, and it's a pretty robust, the link is in the slideshow, so you'll have that. What you're actually able to do is dig in and look at participation of race and ethnicity, developer, landlord, or property owner, or children and household by zip code, so you can sort of see what participation looked like. Additionally, as we'll go through these, you'll be able to dig in and see every community member's feedback as part of this. So participation. Here you'll see there were 216 total participants in person and online. You can see the racial breakdown on the screen compared to the 2010 census. Additionally, you'll be able to see ownership versus renting. So there were 60% of the folks, ish, 57.8 were homeowners, 19 were renters, 3.3 were others, and about 20% did not disclose. Regarding developer or landlord, there were 16% of the participants were landlords or developers or property managers, 62% were not, and 21% did not disclose. So in moving forward, we want to be upfront that this pattern of like 20-ish to 28% just did not respond throughout. So the way that we have it structured, we'll talk about that in a second. So what we tested were the recommendations from the Planning Commission that the City Commission had a public hearing on March 27th. We weren't trying to validate or sell these ideas, but to take the temperature of the community around that. And so what you'll see is sort of like the communal thermometer around that. We're going to break it down via pie charts. And so what we had asked the community members to say is, are you confident or not confident, and do you approve or disapprove? So you have this sort of spectrum of solid green, which is I feel confident enough to support this decision as is. Light green is I'm not confident, but I still support it. Gray was a non-response. Light red is I'm not confident and I'm uncomfortable with as it's currently presented. And solid red is I'm confident and not uncomfortable with the recommendation. So that said, we wanted to jump in to Amendment 3, which if you would turn your pages to page 3. Amendment 3 is around missing middle housing. It's one way to infill density and build a more walkable neighborhood. These are small-scale developments that are the size of large houses like duplexes and fourplexes, bungalow courts, and mansion apartments. Amendment 3 would make it possible to build or convert to this type of housing with administrative approval on any corner lot in a low-density residential district and on any lot inside of 500 feet of a mixed-use commercial space. So this is sort of the overview. In order to make that happen, there were tweaks needed to dwelling unit width, minimum lot area requirement, and specific asks around corner lot or any lot inside of 500 feet. So we'll dig through what this looks like. These are some of the visuals that were presented. All right. So around reducing the minimum dwelling unit width from 18 feet to 14 feet. In total, there was a 55% approval of this, of all voting participants. Those that on the far right there, what you'll see is those were recommendations to consider from those not in support. All right, so some of the things were, hey, is this in line with area-specific plans? Should this vary by neighborhood, as this typology is going to look kind of awkward in different spaces? Potential issues of safety, overcrowding, and a general sentiment that like 14 feet is not something that we are used to in this community, and so there was an opinion that it was too small. Moving down, this is eliminating the minimum lot area requirement of 20,000 square feet for multifamily residential developments. This one was pretty split. This one, I believe, was at 50.3% opposed to this. The largest questions were around neighborhood-specific implementation, if this needed to be something that was broadly cast across the whole community, and green space implications. Moving ahead, on any corner lot in a low-density residential zone district, this would allow two-family residential development through either new construction or the conversion of existing structures. This one came in at 60. Oh my gosh, I should have summarized the. I'm doing math on the fly. The majority were opposed to this at 58%. These, with the recommendations being that these should be in line with neighborhood-specific should be neighborhood specific and in line with area specific plans. There was concern about a lack of strict or updated design standards, and in general that it eliminated this process of by right eliminates neighborhood voice. Finally, for 500 feet with administrative approval, this was the one, there was 68-ish% opposed to this. The largest concerns were that 500 feet was an arbitrary number. The coaching was to start with 100 feet or one block to start smaller. That again, there was a lack of strict design standards, and to consider limiting the number of units available. So in summary, this is how the sheet sort of breaks down. So regarding 14 feet width, 57.2% in favor, eliminate minimum lot area requirement at 50.3, and then any corner lot and for any lot were significantly more opposed. Okay. Moving on to amendment number 6. This is a density bonus that under certain circumstances would allow space required for land or units to be smaller than usual so that more housing can be made available. What that looks like, oh man, is that instead of 2,000 square feet needed per dwelling, it would only be 1,500 feet needed per dwelling. If that were to happen, and if 70% of the units, if 30% of the units were to be made affordable by someone making 60% AMI, and there was a failure to perform clause, if those two things were in place, then that would sort of unlock this incentive. So again, visuals trying to use a football field saying, you know, 15, so you need 4,500 square feet of a lot you need for 3 units. Total participation here was at 18% no, not confident, 46.5 firm no. The questions here were mostly rooted in does this go far enough? So many were concerned that 60% AMI is still not affordable and should considering having some additional units at a lower percentage of AMI. Additionally, considering someone had questioned the metric altogether and saying we needed a regional AMI and not a national. There were concerns around the 15-year commitment of the life of a building, and if that was long enough, that there needed to be an increase of the percentage of affordable units to more than 30%, and that the failure perform clause didn't have enough teeth. So if somebody were to say, hey, this is great, I'm going to do this to get the incentive, but then I back out of it, what's to prevent them? Is there documentation and legalese to say that the penalty would be firm enough? Do we have enough staff to monitor or enforce the compliance? So that again was at 64.5% opposed. Amendment 8 is around accessory dwelling units. Accessory dwelling units are small apartments with design consistent with the main dwelling. These are either attached to the main house or a separate building, usually in a backyard. ADUs are currently legal, but only when approved through special land use procedures. Amendment 8 would allow any homeowner to build a small ADU on their lot with administrative approval. So this is subject to zoning requirements, including parking and green space. This amendment would require that the ADU must not be larger than 40% of the size of the primary home, must have owner occupancy and of 1 unit, and this is sized between 400 and 800 square feet. So this is how this one shook out. So the majority were in favor of ADUs. So here were some of the visuals, again, trying to make it really clear what an ADU is, where this could happen inside of a low-density residential area where certain conditions were met. And this is how the vote broke down. So recommendations from those not in favor were to revise for lot area requirement, were to revise it, that there would be implications on neighborhood character, and to develop specific design standards for ADUs to preserve character. Regarding regulating maximum building height, there were concerns regarding the height compared to the main dwelling, and again that this should be neighborhood specific, and that there was a lack of a strict design standard. Regarding permitting 2-story detached ADUs, the potential for this to change the character, that there's not strict design standards, the concerns regarding height, and concerns were regarding height compared to the main dwelling. And additionally, enforcement. Do we have the capacity to monitor these sorts of dwellings? Increasing the floor area ratio between the primary residence and the ADU. This was 64% in favor. Again, the recommendations to consider from those not in support were the design standards and that there needs to be consideration of varying these by neighborhood. The least favorable of these in the community was eliminating the maximum occupancy of an ADU. There was concerns that some limit should exist via bedroom or number of persons. And again, the question of do we have the capacity to regulate or enforce this? But that was still 51.5% in favor of the voting population. With a total, when you consider the in favor, not confident, goes up to 53.3. So there you see a sort of breakdown of 62%, 66, 65, 67, and 53. The final was around non-condo zero lot line development. This amendment would allow non-condo zero lot line development or row house style homes to be built with administrative approval inside of a low density residential district. Grand Rapids currently allows this type of development in mixed density residential districts. So here was the opinion breakdown for this. So we'll dig into this in a second. So again, some visuals of what these look like, of where this proposed change would happen. 500 feet of a traditional business area. With this one, a total of 62.8% of folks were not in favor. The recommendations from those not had said that 500 feet is too much and an arbitrary number, that either needs to be 100 feet or neighborhood specific. Again, there were concerns about design standards and demolition and displacement. Reducing to a 14-foot minimum dwelling unit, that this is potentially not in line with area-specific plans, that there needs to be consideration of varying by low-density residential neighborhood type, and that there would be green space implications. 56% in favor of this. Removing minimum lot width, the concerns, so 51.9% were in favor of this. And this was concerns regarding the lack of design standards, density and displacement concerns, and potential conflict with area-specific plans. And finally, reducing minimum lot area. The concerns about density, demolition, and displacement. Again, the lack of design standards, the impact on neighborhood character, and green space and setbacks. So here again is the summary of that. So 62.8% not in favor or opposed to the first, and then the second two, reducing minimum dwelling and requirement for lot width, in favor of, and in the last one, 51.3% opposed. So what we had done is made sort of placed these as far as percentage of approval on a spectrum. So on the screen in front of you, you can see that that ADUs are dwelling consistently on the right-hand side with more favorable. The missing middle, any lot within 500 feet was the least popular. And then a broad spectrum and a whole lot of middle ground, a whole lot of mixed opinions. And one of the things that we wanted to make sure in all of these things, that the things that came up were concerns regarding by right, neighborhood voice and input, and pushing to the master plan were the most repeated expressions of frustration with these proposed changes. With by right, there were 108 instances of, hey, this shouldn't happen by right. Those 108 instances stemmed from 27 neighbors. Neighborhood voice and input, there were 103 instances from 35 folks, and pushing to the master plan was 34 instances of 13 people. Again, there were 216 total submissions to help put that in context. So as you move forward, a couple of things to consider. You have the public testimony from March 27th. You have the handwritten material from residents. You have the housing compendium. You have this quantifiable feedback from 216 residents via online forum and these in-person engagements. And you have those who have expressed concerns and voted no, that they tended to focus on three issues: administrative approval, neighborhood voice and input, and a deeper master plan engagement. That said, we wanted to hold some space for questions.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Adam. All right, I'll turn to my colleagues to start with questions, and then I would also welcome any input or questions from our city manager or staff. So, colleagues, questions for Adam? Go ahead, Commissioner.
Can you give me a little bit more detail on why they were concerned about voting no on those two issues, the administrative and approval issues?
Regarding with by right and neighborhood voice and input, or
Correct.
by right?
With
Yeah.
by right?
Yeah, I think that was the most prominent voice, is that it eliminates neighborhood voice into a specific like their built environment. I don't know if you want to explain a little bit more, like if there's more that you're looking for, Mr. Moody.
Well, yeah, I think what I really want to get to is that the individuals who participated in this, I think you said there was 216.
16. Yep.
And this is the first time that you did this with this particular group in the city of Grand Rapids?
This is our first time, but I would say a good chunk of the participants have been at the public hearing prior. So some of those voices are repeated, yeah.
And these were residential people, correct?
Residents of Grand Rapids, yes.
Did they understand, from your knowledge, what zoning and housing were about?
There was a spectrum of awareness of those things. What we tried to do is level set at the beginning with a 15-minute sort of intro to zoning, in particular the way that each neighborhood, low-density residential type, has different sorts of rules around green space or mobility concerns, et cetera. So that was a constraint that we were forced to work inside of, regarding like how much. I feel like you could take a master class on zoning and still not get it, but trying to distill that down into a way that allowed the majority of the content to be dug into these 4 amendments.
Yeah, I understand wanting to keep it simple as possibly, but then there are times when you're dealing with individuals in a setting where they're not truly understanding what's happening in front of them. And I just had some concerns about the zoning and about the plan. And because on your data here, there's a lot of percentages where you had a large group of people saying no, they're not interested, and they were concerned.
Yeah.
Thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner Kelly, did you have a question?
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank you for this work, and the visuals are so helpful. Really appreciate that. It's very complicated, as my colleague said, for people to understand, us included. It's not. This is why we rely on staff so much. One of the things that struck me, colleagues, is the repeated request for monitoring and enforcement, and I would be real interested in delving into that a little bit further, because it's going to, I think, come up as well when we get our housing board in place, and whether there can be some collaboration with the Housing Commission. I know our Community Development Department would probably need an additional staff person to do that, but what that would look like and whether it's something we should consider, because we want to monitor over time that people are, if they make a commitment to affordable housing, that they're keeping it. And at least that we already have code enforcement in terms of quality, but this would probably be an additional load. So it's just something to start thinking about for the budget.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner Hart, you want to weigh in? This was your idea to work with public agency and do some community meetings. Do you want to?
Yeah. Thank you for this. I love the way it rolled out. I love the team you put together. Thrilled with 216 people showing up and given this much time is significant. At this point, I'm trying to figure out what our next step as a group is, but a couple of questions that I had was, there's two ideas that I just made notes about. One of is there's a consistent phrase that said lack of design standards. And so while I believe that it's our job to listen for the sake of listening, like I do believe we do have some, so I would like to hear, maybe not give a rebuttal, Suzanne, but like to hear what our design standards are currently. And then this idea of, that the density bonus didn't go far enough is why people voted no, is I think something that we should, I can believe that, I can understand that. That's a lot of what we've been hearing as proposals have come forward to us, is that AMI isn't getting low enough. So I can agree with that, but the question that I would be interested in testing again is it's movement, and it's towards something. So voting no because it's not far enough is one thing.
It was an interesting voter submissions around that is you would have folks who said, I don't want this type of housing in my neighborhood.
Sure.
So they're voting no for a very different reason than folks who are voting no for saying like, hey, we want this, but this just isn't, this doesn't go far enough.
Yeah.
And I think those folks found themselves to be interesting allies inside of that.
Yeah.
But I don't know if the spirit was the same in which
Right.
they put
I thought
forward
that was just really interesting to talk
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
Suzanne, would you, I mean, part of the reason why I asked this is because, you know, my wife got an earful from me the other day. I woke up and there's somebody cutting siding down the street from me. They're on my street, every street has an open porch. It's a craftsman-style bungalow street. And they're closing theirs in. I hate it, looks ugly, but they have the ability to do it. And I didn't get a say in it, and at the same rate, like, they're investing thousands of dollars in their property. But anyway, I just would love to hear your take on it.
And I'll have Suzanne speak to that, and then I know that our city manager has been, took a deep dive into this topic as soon as he started last week, and I think he probably has some ideas about next steps as well. So after I hear from colleagues and Suzanne, I'll turn it over to our city manager. Suzanne?
Actually, Commissioner, if all the other porches are open and they're enclosing theirs, that could be a zoning violation. So,
Two on my street have closed in the
yeah,
last year.
they're not supposed to.
Why don't you two talk about that offline?
Yeah, it effectively changes the building setback, so we can talk about that.
Which leads to his enforcement question.
Yeah, exactly.
It
Who's gonna
does.
enforce it?
Exactly. So we greatly appreciate the question. When we're talking about design guidelines, one thing that we have experienced as staff and to some degree I think the Planning Commission is that we do have a form-based zoning ordinance. It's more of a hybrid, so we're not heavy on built form. We don't prescribe building types in our zone districts. If you look at other codes that are heavy form-based codes, they actually prescribe the building types. They say, we want a large, it looks like a large house, but it's an apartment building, or we want this kind of building, and it's more prescriptive. There's pros and cons to it being more prescriptive, and also to looking at how you regulate building materials or windows or other things. But we've always felt like we had a pact with the neighborhood associations going back to when we did the master plan. People described that they liked the character of their neighborhood. And then we went and did a neighborhood pattern workbook with them and said, what defines that character of your neighborhood that makes it important to you? And they identified a series of items that we would then turn into the zoning ordinance and regulate. And the pact in that was that if we allow buildings to be built the way that you described, then they should be approved, then they could be approved by staff.
Right.
If we want to have the Planning Commission as a lever to require a better design, we can do that too. And in this case, we don't have a lot of really good descriptors for the type of residential, especially that missing middle, that we would consider high quality or that fits in the character of the neighborhood. We have basic guidelines like facade transparency and requiring a porch, and in traditional neighborhoods not having a garage on the front of the house. But what we found over time is, especially when we're dealing with these smaller multifamilies, you don't have the large developer doing the project like a Rockford or Orion. Instead, you have the guy who lives in Sparta who wants to come do some infill, just kind of an example. Or you might have some other housing developers, but he could live in Grand Rapids too. Or she.
Stand finished.
But then they may have found all the windows at Home Depot on clearance, and the windows don't match. They're even oriented in different ways, and the design, there's not a sense of design or architecture to them, which is the pushback then we get from the community saying, this doesn't look like it belongs here, or it's really ugly. And we've had that. And so I think the comments from the public about wanting design guidelines provides that assurance. If you're going to allow for administrative approval, we'd like to know what we're getting. And so that's kind of the pact that we've had in the past, that people know what to expect, and it can be clear and consistent for them over time, rather than being surprised and then we can't change it.
Thank you, Suzanne. I'm going to get to commissioners who haven't been able to speak yet, and then we'll come back around, and I'd like the city manager to also have an opportunity. So I'll get back to you, Commissioner Monique. Commissioner Lanier?
Thank you so much, Suzanne, for that response, and thanks, Adam, for the presentation. This was a really good, thorough presentation. I appreciate it. I was not able to attend any of the sessions, so this helps me to understand everything that transpired. I think Suzanne's comments actually are the comments that I was going to make, because I'm not surprised by the results of this. It's consistent with what we've been hearing for over 2 years, since we've been having some discussions about housing, that people do like, when you make a decision to buy a home, you're making a decision, about more than one thing. It's not just about the pricing. You're making decisions about the character of the neighborhood, et cetera. And when there are projects that potentially could change the character of the neighborhood, then people want to weigh into that. And I think that that's what this is telling me. And I think even what Suzanne mentioned, having standards is important if we are, even on the areas where they've said, okay, we may be willing to do zero lot lines, but we need to have standards in place so the guy or gal from Rockford or Grand Rapids can know as they're considering infill what they're getting into beforehand. I think I am curious to know, I do have a question. I am curious to know how much conversation was had on the fact that these things are all something that any developer could do. And in some ways, I feel like we're having the conversation as though this is new. Like every single thing that's in here, any developer could do. There are just some hurdles, or there are just rules in place that would regulate what would happen and what steps they would need to take in order to get to a point where they could do any of these things. So that's my first question. And then the second question is, I know that I've heard at least that there are some concerns about the video first, and that there wasn't enough voice from the community who frequently have come to meetings to speak about homelessness in our community and the price of housing in our community. And they felt like that voice was missing from the video. I thought the video was really a good educational piece, but I too, when I got to the end, I was thinking, there's a voice missing from this. So I'm curious to hear a little bit about that, because I know others are asking those questions of at least me. So I'm curious to know if you all heard those concerns and if you had any input on what we saw and
Yeah.
et cetera.
So I'll start with the first question, in that as we would work through, we would say all of this stuff is already legal and already exists. It has been approved and exists in Grand Rapids. So this isn't necessarily, you're agreeing to something new. This is like, you would essentially be saying that you're greenlighting this type of approval not to happen without sort of on a case-by-case basis. So in every session, whether it be around accessory dwelling units or the row house style development or multifamily conversion, all of that stuff already, and I feel like we were pretty explicit that this stuff does exist. Regarding the second point, I think there was internally, the conversation around housing affordability is really broad and also really deep. And so understanding that these are sort of market-based interventions to housing affordability and not necessarily affordable housing. I had taken the tack to say, like, if we could make it about those issues and not necessarily the broader conversation. One of the concerns, I think, is like how, as you start adding up all these other things that are additionally complex issues in their own right, that can sort of muddy the water. And so how do you, even at the beginning, is like, do we set the tone where it's like, this isn't about housing, affordable housing specifically, Amendment 6 is, but the majority about housing affordability. So trying to make that more clear inside the messaging.
So was that messaging, did that come from us? Because I feel like when we started with the Great Housing Strategies, it's always been about affordable housing. And I don't know over the last couple years how we've kind of converted into a whole different model of how we're describing what we're talking about. But it all started from Commissioner Kelly, Commissioner Lumpkins and I saying, okay, something is wrong here. People can't afford to live here. So it's always been about affordability.
Good.
And I understand what
Yeah.
you're describing, but I don't know if maybe we have not been clear as we're asking people to partner with us to convey a message on our behalf about what it is we're really trying to get at, because I wouldn't want there to be this much engagement with this level of detail, and we've missed the message of talking about affordable housing.
Well, can I maybe ask what you mean by affordable housing? Because it's like, regarding AMI, like the 60% AMI, like Amendment 6 definitely is about that, but the rest aren't necessarily about affordable housing as defined by AMI.
Yeah, and now, I think through the Housing Advisory Committee, I think that's when
The transition.
some additional conversations happen. So Commissioner O'Connor's been waiting to speak, so I'll have him speak since he chaired that committee, and then I'll turn it to Commissioner Jones. I think Suzanne wants to weigh in on special land use and variance, and then I'm going to turn to our city manager.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack here, and I don't think we're going to come to any conclusions yet today. I think that's a
And
conversation
today,
for another day.
Today was about a report out, so I want to be
Absolutely.
clear,
So
this isn't about
I do want to say
decision-making.
thank you for doing this work and engaging in the community. I think that, with all things that this included, that you get, even this data is skewed based on what it needs to be done, right? Like 216 self-selected individuals came to a meeting to talk about this, and so there are clearly 216 people that cared about housing, but it's not to say that, there's another 198,000 people that live in the city of Grand Rapids who housing impacts every day, and so this is a data set that provides us some insight, but isn't the end-all be-all. I do think that as it relates to affordability versus affordable housing, I think the case is absolutely for the city of Grand Rapids. We are a body and a governmental entity that sets a framework in which housing operates and gets constructed and gets managed and gets certified and all the things that we have our fingers in as it comes to housing. But we, as a city, don't create any housing, right? And so as much as we want to create as much affordable housing in the city of Grand Rapids as we can, ultimately we have to create a framework by which affordable housing can be created by the private market, by the nonprofit sector, by the Grand Rapids Housing Commission, whatever entity that is. And so all of these things, while some of them speak specifically to affordable housing, I think were attempted as an opportunity because we heard from our nonprofit housing developers in Grand Rapids who say, yes, we live in a cycle of low-income housing tax credits, which are the #1 creator of low-income housing units in Grand Rapids, but to live outside of that cycle, these are some suggestions that we need to be able to create smaller scale type developments in our neighborhood. There's so many things in this that are, this whole idea of 500 feet just frustrates me to no end because it is completely arbitrary. And while my reason for thinking it's arbitrary might be different than others who think it's arbitrary, I think there's a lot to worry about with creating a framework and concentrating impact. So I'm excited to have this conversation at a deeper dive where we can try to unpack some of this and really. We need to do something, because if we do nothing and we continue to punt on this, then the status, there's no more housing units being created right now in any small-scale development form because of the process that we currently have, so.
Okay, thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner Jones, before I turn to...
Yeah, real quick, Mayor, I just want to extend a thank you to Adam and the team for the work that you did with this community engagement process. I think it's very helpful. I think this further clarifies the need for us to have some very uncomfortable conversations. What I'm faced with on a regular basis, what I hear, what I see is that there's a desire for people to call Grand Rapids home, and the inability to actually make that a reality based on, obviously, affordability and lack of housing stock. I also know that we live in a time when, NIMBYism is real, and I think that we'll have to have those conversations that, again, are uncomfortable and really speak to some of those issues and deal with them head on. I think we have, there's perhaps, from all of the research that I've seen, everyone speaks to the power of, or the outcomes that come by way of mixed-income communities. And so, to create those communities requires, I think, a real intentionality and probably something that hasn't necessarily been done in our town, because this is probably the first time we've ever seen, something like this in terms of the real need for housing. But I also understand that, we have opportunities to build and to develop. And what I don't want to see is this idea of every time there's conversation around affordable housing or affordability, it's looking in only certain areas of the city. I think that's a great. I think that's, for lack of a better term, I just think it's sinful because we continue to create these areas of concentrated poverty, and that gets us nowhere fast. And so I think that we just have to have these very in-depth conversations, and we obviously take a look at everything that's being suggested. I would love to see us find a way to work and get to a place where we're able to negotiate and find some ways to make some of these things work. Because I don't want to see us necessarily punt everything down the road. And again, that's part of why we're here. We got to make difficult decisions, and we have to, make sure that, obviously not everyone's going to be happy, but we still have this issue of we don't have enough housing stock, and folks want to make Grand Rapids home. And I still believe, again, that the folks who need to live in Grand Rapids can't afford to live in Grand Rapids. And so obviously there's some things we have to do with that, understanding that we're limited in our, with regards to the tools that we have in our toolbox. But I'm ready for the discussion. I'm ready to move forward and see if we can come up with some very innovative ways to address this. So.
Great. Thanks, Commissioner.
Yep.
All right, I'm going to turn to Mr. Mark Washington, his very first meeting, very first topic on our Committee of the Whole agenda. I know you've been talking to staff and really listening intently about this issue. So do you want to talk about your thoughts on next steps? And
Sure. Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners, for your feedback. I want to thank Adam and Kirk as well for the work that they've done. I had a chance to meet them last week and engage in some of the conversation, and also want to thank the staff for their work in supporting it. What's apparent to me is there has been significant amount of discussion since, I believe, March of this past year around this issue in various aspects of community engagement with the most recent work that we have now from public agency. And while there still may be some disagreement around some of the proposed amendments, what's clear to me based on even the chart that's before us on the spectrum here, there seems to be some support for some areas where we can perhaps move forward with some of the recommendations and amendments, and then begin looking at what other areas require more work. And certainly there are some that may have more longitudinal aspects and may need more time for conversation around the master plan. And so what I've done, I asked the staff when we were preparing for this briefing, and again, my apologies to the Commission for not being able to get this to you sooner for you to consume, but we will do that, endeavor to do that in the future. But I did ask the staff to consider some of the feedback and began to categorize which items could potentially be more actionable sooner in concert with our title, Housing Now. What can we do now? Which items may require a little bit more work, and certainly that last category of what items might require more consideration in the master planning process. So I've asked them to bundle that, and I'm going to ask Mr. DeLong and Ms. Schultz if they would and come and share that for Commission consideration as you hear that, and then be able to give the staff direction so that we can move forward.
We'll get arranged here. All right, so I'm going to talk with you. Come over here.
okay.
Join us here. So thank you, Mr. City Manager. What we have for you are a bundle of three categories. So the first are those items recommended to move forward now, things that we believe there is considerable agreement on and consensus. Then those areas that we could move forward after some rework, so those we would recommend remanding back to planning staff for some rework and then come back to you. And then finally, those items that were better left to a larger discussion as part of the master plan process. So there are 7 things in the first category that we believe we could move forward, and those 7 are these. So Amendment 3, the missing middle housing, the 14-foot unit width, so reducing the unit width from 18 to 14 feet. The second one would be in Amendment 8, which is about accessory dwelling units, and that would be to change the minimum lot size. So any lot that meets the zoning requirements in that district could have an ADU.
Eric, can I clarify? But it would still fall under a special land use process
No, these are by right. We're suggesting these all be by right.
for the ADUs.
Yes. I should say by administrative approval. So, also on Amendment 8, accessory dwelling units, to increase the maximum height limit for each of the, be able to have a unit over a garage. There are actually 2 units like that, or 2 amendments like that. So also, so that would be 3 and 4. And then also on accessory dwelling units, increasing the floor area ratio. So currently it's at 25, so we would increase it up to 40%. So, and you saw the graphic and you see what that can do. Also then on Amendment 9, row houses and minimum width, the 14-foot unit width was there as well, and we think that that's something that we can move forward. Finally,
Eric, is there a way that we can get this summarized document in either on the screen or in front of our commissioners so they can follow along with it? Because
let's see.
Someone making copies?
We can try to use a document viewer if somebody can get it started.
Yeah, so what I'm doing, Eric, is I'm going through these, and I'm just circling the ones that you're referring to. That may be a quick way to do it. If you go through the slides Adam just created and go to each amendment. That's the only way I could keep up.
And if we could just get a copy of the,
Yeah, well, I'll make you a copy later.
Yeah. Go to number 3, they're all.
just, yes. So Commissioners, as we tee this up and hear from staff, I think what I would like to do is then give you time to digest this and follow up directly with the city manager, and then we can talk about next steps.
Okay, so now we're going to get that in for us.
Yeah, all this technology, look at us using
I
it.
know, finally.
Thank God for Travis.
Okay, there we go.
Good job.
All right, so there's my red dot where I ought to be. See if I can just move over here.
Okay, so 3.
And we are having copies made for you too. So then I was down to amendment number 7. So, and that is one that is unlike the other 6, the previous 6, in that the previous 6 all received a significant majority of support through the public agency engagement. But item 7, the missing middle, which would eliminate the 20,000 square foot minimum lot size for multifamily developments, is one that the planning department has seen several times for variance requests for small projects. So we've actually added the step to the development process that, so in addition to special land use, it would also require variance. And those variances have been granted routinely. And so what we're suggesting is that since this kind of goes with the spirit of being able to produce more housing units and do it on a smaller scale, that we move ahead and make this change now. We think that our record at the Board of Zoning Appeals is such that we should go ahead and take care of this now. Okay? So those are the 7 that we suggest would be good to go ahead with now. Okay. So those that we think probably could use some more work. So you heard about the affordable housing density bonus. And the curious thing here is that this is the one item that when we hear from neighborhood associations, they're saying we should do this now. But when we hear from respondents, they're saying, wait a minute, there are some issues here. Either you didn't go far enough, or there are other issues involved. And so we think this is something that with work with our planning department and others who have been involved in the housing work, we can put forth in city commission discussion. We can get this formed in a way that with a little more work, we can move it forward. So the next one has to do with limiting the maximum occupancy and number of bedrooms. We think currently this is covered in the code. We want to do some more research, and we think that with some more work, this could move forward. And then the row house and a minimum lot width, we think there's more work to do there as well. Then, down here. So those items that are better left to broad discussion. So Amendment 3, that would be the 500 feet. So obviously you saw that almost 70% of those responding thought that the 500 feet addition was not something that should be done, and they, for a variety of reasons, you can read the comments that are posted online for those, and you'll see the rationale. I think the same rationale applies to the 100-foot limit that was proposed initially, and I think this just needs more work, and it's something that can be done as part of the master plan process. The row house and minimum width, we tested the 8-unit configuration of row houses. I think that a lower number may have been more palatable to those voting, but the results are that the people aren't quite ready for this yet, and so this is a discussion I think that could come forward as part of the master plan and would be, I think, very well received in that setting. And then finally, thank you. So reducing the minimum lot area in LDR mixed density zones, that's one that we think needs more work as well. So Suzanne, if you'd like to amplify this in any way.
So basically anything that would, I think one of my earlier comments when the question was asked about how do we do this, we do not have an exclusive single-family residential zone district in our zoning ordinance, which is unique, and we were one of the leaders actually in the country back in 2007 for adopting that. So all of these row houses, accessory dwelling units, missing middle, they are allowed in all of our zone districts. So I want to make that clear. The issue that we've got is there are impediments. For example, the width of the building from 18 to 14, that makes it more challenging for developers to do, just because now they have more expense they have to put into the building. So those are minor changes that really don't have an impact. The ones that we're saying left for a broader discussion for a master plan process really talks about the approval process. And that's really where we're saying from special land use to administrative approval, we would defer that until the master plan discussion and have a conversation with the community about that. It would also be an opportunity to have that design guidelines conversation as well, so those could pair nicely together during the master plan and having that conversation, so there is that predictability for the community. But some of the dimensional impediments that we have can be adjusted now to make it easier for developers when they come in. The Planning Commission regularly grants waivers for some of these things, and the part of it's an education process, I think, with the development community, but then also just making sure that it's clear that you can do other things that developers may not think they can do now, and just making it work better for them. So that elimination of the 20,000 square foot minimum lot size, that does not mean that we're eliminating the density requirement for a lot. So that's still in place. So, really the 1 through 7, staff is relatively comfortable with. The ADU by right or special land use would be a question for the commission. But the other piece, the process question, is really what we're suggesting that we'd leave on the table for future.
Okay, thank you. So commissioners, in light of time, so this topic was meant to be a report out, and all of us received this information this morning for the very first time. And so what I would like to do is, since today is not about making decisions, what I would like to do is kind of wrap up this discussion, give you time to read through this, look through the materials, and then have further conversation with the city manager about next steps, okay? Ma'am, I see you keep raising your hand. This is just a conversation and an opportunity for public comment. So that happens at our meeting tonight, okay? Yeah, and you're welcome to email us as well, okay? All right, commissioners, are you comfortable with that? Okay, city manager, anything to add as we wrap this up? Good? Okay. All right, so I'm going to move us along because we have 5 action items today that we still have to get to before our special briefings, and I want to be mindful. I know we have guest speakers coming in for the special briefing, and I want to be respectful of their time as well. So we'll start with our second item on the agenda, and that is a resolution authorizing certain special events subject to Chapter 53 of the City Code.
So moved. Support.
All right, and is Yvette here this morning? There she is. Yvette, you want to tell us about this? I know this is kind of standard operating procedure. You come before us every month with these.
Absolutely. Good morning.
Good morning.
So as we strive to be a city that offers events and activities all 4 seasons, or in Michigan, are there only 2 or 3 seasons? But
No, there's 4. We embrace all 4 of them.
right, you'll notice that we have a nice amount of events scheduled coming up in October, November, and December.
Great. Commissioners, any questions about that? It's a full schedule. We continue to be busy, which we like. We want to be a city that nurtures events and have vibrant public spaces. So any questions, comments? Nope. All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, it carries.
Thank
All
you.
right, thank you, Yvette. Next, that will take us to a resolution approving an expansion to the Neighbors of Belknap Lookout's residential parking permit zone. Can I get a motion?
So moved?
Support.
All right, Mr. Naramore is here to tell us about this.
Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. So this morning, this is a request to expand the currently the only existing residential parking permit zone in the city that's been out there since about 2014. So the city staff has been working with the neighborhood since about March of this year upon their request. We also have made some concurrent changes to the residential parking permit program to make it less cumbersome for the neighbors themselves to administer. So this was the last of our items that actually has gone through the full gambit of a parking count as well as a neighborhood vote. And then also a public hearing was also held on September 11th, of which we had no neighbors or no one came that testified either for or against. In addition, I also wanted to point out that we have been working with Mr. Johnson and other staff from GRPS related to the Coit School for some of the drop-off and pickup, which has been impacted, and we've come to a workable compromise that actually supports the elementary school as well. So this proposal would actually extend the existing residential parking permit zone on 4 streets and would mirror it with the existing Monday through Friday from 8 to 5 p.m.
Great. Commissioner, this is Second Ward, so Commissioner Kelly or Commissioner Jones, you want to weigh in on this? I know you've been a part of these conversations. I know when I was a commissioner, we had lengthy conversations about residential permit zones.
Yeah, this is the pioneer project, as you know, because this was the first area that had the RPP program, and this really kind of closes off the square and adds a little more, because as we all know, the neighborhood has grown. There are more apartments there, Grand Valley is there, so the parking squeeze has continued, and this will be a way to relieve that.
Okay, great. Commissioner Jones, anything to add? All right. Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, next we have a resolution setting a public hearing to consider a residential parking permit zone on Alabama Avenue.
So moved.
Support. All right.
Yeah,
Josh,
yes,
tell us
so,
about this one. Is it a little unusual because it's just a small stretch?
It is, and so you'll actually see when we made some changes to the residential parking permit program, we were wanting to be able to address some concerns that we hear often from residents, which is areas in which there are some constraints that have been caused on the system, whether it's by metering or whether by development in the area. So you're going to see this as well as the next agenda item and a few more over the next few months in areas of the city where it doesn't meet the original intent of the 3-block area. So on Alabama Street, we actually had an issue that was created as the city had expanded the parking meters over the course of this summer and into the fall on Bridge Street. And we noticed and received a lot of concerns and complaints from 2 new residential apartment buildings that have been located on Alabama Street. And the fear is that as we continue to add more metered parking, people will look where there's unregulated or unrestricted parking and taking away from some of the residents in the area. So what we're requesting is a public hearing on October 23rd to get more feedback from the surrounding neighborhoods and the businesses as well to see whether they're for or against moving forward with this.
Great, thank you. All right, commissioners?
Yeah, it's a
Anything
very
to add?
small area, but I think it makes sense to see what people say.
Okay, and this is just to set the public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed? It carries. All right, next is a resolution setting a public hearing to consider a residential parking permit zone on Lake Drive.
So moved.
Support?
All right.
Yes. So this one is very similar to the previous item. We also had done some metering out on Cherry Street as well as Lake Drive. And what we had actually noticed is this is an area in which a couple of the residential units don't have driveways or have no on-site parking. So we are requesting to have a public hearing for a small stretch of Lake Drive to allow for accommodating some of those neighbors that were negatively impacted by some of the changes in the business district.
Okay, great. Any questions about that?
Just a
Commissioner
comment. Josh did receive, we both received some feedback about this, and adjustments were made, and we have got a meeting coming up yet with another small area, so we're in communication with the residents and businesses.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, next that will take us to our resolution setting the date to consider zoning ordinance text amendments regarding building height, permitted uses in certain zone districts, and site layout. Can I get a motion?
Support.
Support?
All right, and this would establish October 23rd for us to consider this. Suzanne, do you want to talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, this is just really a cleanup item. We've been busy. We have a lot of stuff going on. And when we were addressing the Housing Now pieces as well as the alcohol pieces, we had other amendments that we were including as cleanup items. Those were missed when we pulled out those other sections, when we finally advanced the miscellaneous. So this, you already have seen this. It's just a little bit of a cleanup. So the 3 are building element requirements. When we're looking at in the traditional neighborhood, this is similar to a design requirement to make sure that the floors aren't subgrade and that the first floor is matching the first floor of areas surrounding it. The other piece is making sure that the Planning Commission still, again, has that flexibility when they're looking at neighborhood context, but they could allow higher building heights than what we currently have in the code for that specific district, but it's subject to all of the other massing compatibility of the existing structure in neighborhoods. The other one is the cleanup that we had. We had talked about this before in implementing the Granville Area Specific Plan for Clyde Park in Granville and how the TBA district and allowing office use would be affected. So this is just reinserting that as well as Commissioner Lanier's amendment for Lake Michigan Drive, 28th Street in Plainfield to allow greater flexibility for uses in that area. And then finally, for our neighborhood office service zone district, the number that we had for the square foot required for density has been very high compared to what we allow in our commercial, other mixed-use commercial districts. Currently, it's 3,000 square feet. We wanted to take that down to match what we're seeing in other areas to 1,250.
Great, thank you. Commissioners, any questions about this? So it would come back before us on October 23rd for adoption. Commissioner?
So we need to change it from A2P to L2P?
L2P?
You said Lake Michigan Drive, so.
Yes, LMD.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Work with me on my acronym here. I need to know what it is.
I know. We're mixing it up for you.
Love it. All right, commissioners, any other questions or comments? All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, Commissioners, I think we can get through the executive session in 10 minutes. So I'm going to recommend that we do that and that we have the conversation just right here in 9:01. And then we come back in here at 11 for our special briefing. We have two briefings. One is a presentation on the Bloomberg Harvard Summer Fellows Grand Rapids Economic Equity Policy Recommendations. Carewood will be doing that one. And then we'll have an update on the Kent County Essential Needs Task Force, or ENTF, and the work they're doing in their committees. So I'm going to ask for a motion to go into executive session.
So moved.
All right, and I'll start down here. Commissioner Jones?
Yes.
Thank you. O'Connor?
Yes.
Lanier? Ripart?
Yes.
Moody?
Yes.
And Kelly?
Yes.
All right, so why don't we walk over to 9:01, and I'll have our city attorney and city manager join us.
Thank you.
Okay?
I got some.
And city clerk join us.
Laura.
The executive session, it's just a hearing session, right? Yeah.